Hey everyone, welcome to The Path of Me. I'm your host, Wendy Hutchinson, and I have Krystal Martinez with us today. She is a freelance creative writer and founder of the blog, The Unconventional Mom. As a first time mom and longtime alchemist, she uses her brand as a catalyst to help parents and families live and sustain a more conscious way of life. So, welcome, Krystal. Thanks for being here.
Hi, Wendy. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Just before we got on today, you were talking to me about like conscious parenting and this topic you wanted to talk about. So let's deep dive.
Yeah. I woke up this morning and hopped on my Instagram, and I just saw a couple of things that I was like, we're gonna get into this today. Um, I think one of the main things that I like to talk about with my brand specifically is I think a lot of conscious moms and parenting styles that are, quote unquote conscious are all really focused on how the parent is dealing with the child, but we're really ignoring the root of the issue. And the root of the issue is how the parent is dealing with their own traumas and issues and how that's being
Yeah,
mirrored and reflected into our children, right?
huge.
Just this morning, I even saw a post that's talking about the nervous system, right? And how to regulate yourself in your nervous system so you're able to go through your day without reacting to your child when they're triggering you. And I was like, what does that do? That's really like a band-aid.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what is that going to do if you go into the corner and you breathe for 5 minutes and say kumbaya, and you know what I mean? And then you go back and the next day your kid's going to piss you off again and
Right,
again and again.
right. So you're not really increasing your tolerance or doing your inner work and asking, why am I being triggered?
Right. And I just think parents are being taught that, like, they don't even have the concept that they could actually live a life where they don't get triggered by their kid. Like, this isn't part of parenthood. But we're being taught that. And I think that's crazy.
So what do you think would help
I mean,
these
work,
parents?
self-work. I think this goes for anybody, right? Like, we're talking about parents, but I think it's for anybody in that nobody really wants to keep everything inward, right? We don't want to go internal when something is coming up. And I think for me, especially, I was really tested with one of my children, who is my brother, who I adopted when he was 6 years old. Um, he has ADHD, ADD, ODD, so he was always
That's a
presented it.
lot. That's a lot to handle right after losing your mom, who was also his mom. So he was going through a lot of emotional stuff too, on top of having a lot of those diagnoses, right?
Yeah. So here you are with a kid who has so much like post-traumatic trauma, so
Mhm.
much things to work through at such a young age, and is having such a hard time emotionally.
And he
And
was 6 at the
and
time.
he was 6, yeah. And all he did was trigger the
Like
and
on the daily.
on the daily. And I
Oh,
felt like I went into depression. I got a therapist. Every day I felt like I was drowning in my own emotions
you also
because,
had grief to process too.
yeah,
So
I
not
had my
only
own
are
grief.
you
Yeah.
going through this with your brother, who you took in to raise, but then you are also processing your own grief. So that's a really complicated um, situational thing, right, going on for you at the time.
Right. And that's what made it so hard, is because all the while I'm trying to make sure that this child is okay, but I'm not okay. So he's
Yeah.
only exacerbating my depression and my grief, because I'm not taking the time to deal with it for myself. And really, we can't help people unless we're coming from a healed place. So, we have to put our mask on before we put theirs on, kind of thing. And
But
so I
that's
found
not what we're
myself,
taught, right?
we're not taught that
We're
at all.
always putting their mask on first while we're drowning. I think
Yep.
as parents, because having raised 2 kids myself, I know that it was always others before me. It was like a program, right? You give, 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 and then you're last. If
Yep.
there's anything left, but there's never anything left when it comes around to you, you know.
Right. And
So
that's
that's
because we're taught to survive. We're not taught to thrive.
right.
So we get used to this cycle of suffering through parenthood. And then you have these people telling you it's okay that you're suffering through parenthood. It's temporary. So the next 18 years, you can just deal with it because everyone's going to deal with it. You know what I mean? And that's really not the case. And it's really sad that we don't know any better. And as someone who was doing it for a long time and then saw the other side of it, there's definitely a better way to parent.
How did you break the cycle?
It wasn't even through my own desire to change, because again, when you're in that cycle of not taking accountability and your focus is external instead of internal, you know, I'm kind of doing all these things to help him separate from me, right? I decided to get him a grief counselor who specialized in grief with children. And she was like, you know, I think you should sit in on the session as his parent. It'd be a good idea. Just so he gets more comfortable. And it is about you guys as dynamic too, as new parent and child. And I was like, all right, you know what, that's fine. I had already done, you know, therapy sessions with him and, you know, pretty much anything I can get my hands on at the time, honestly, to do with him. And the first session in, when I sat with her, she asked me questions directly, which I was caught off guard by. And those really simple questions were so triggering for me that I immediately started crying.
Oh my gosh, you could see that you had a lot of unprocessed grief, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I think that my brother was caught off guard by it because I did a really good job of never showing I had emotion. Like he even had, I mean, again, that's another trauma response, another survival response where I didn't want my children to know that I was having a hard time.
Right.
And so for him, it actually translated as, you know, she has no feelings. She doesn't know how I feel.
Right.
You know what I mean? We couldn't relate because I was bottling mine all the time. And so I think that was the first time that he could see that I am human too. And I'm right in the same boat with him in a lot of the stuff that he's going through. But when we got off of that call, I was like, all right, I think I need my own therapy. Like, I think this is so much more than I was putting it out to be. Like, yeah, I was surviving, but I was hyper functioning and depressed.
You know how many moms are in that space where it's just literally, first of all, it is like a survival game. It's like that show Survivor, where you're out on a remote area with very few tools and you have to like compete and survive. And not only that, you're expected to raise these children who thrive and grow and perform. And we have so much of our trauma that we bring to the table because we repeat what we learn as parents, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's inevitable at that point.
Yeah, but I just don't think there's an awareness that people are doing it. I think when we're in it, we have no concept or awareness of what it is, like as a program, as a repetition of how we were raised and us instilling in those kids the same programs, fears, vulnerabilities, and things that maybe we were exposed to because we repeat what we learn as parents.
Yeah. And I think too, we also, we make light of it. Like, you know, you'll see so many posts and reels about how, you know, you're basically like surviving with your tank empty, with 7 kids running around the house. And it's like, you know, normalized in a lot of ways. And yeah, you're going to have days like that. Like, obviously that is parent life in some ways. Like, you know, your toddler is going to run around with like a poop diaper and you got to chase them behind or something like that. But it's all about the way that you're experiencing that, right? Because you shouldn't be spiraling and dying inside every single day that you have these days. Like, it's okay to have some off days and things like that.
I think a lot of times it's that when you're not fully present and doing your inner work and balanced and healed, you are reacting. You're always reactive. You're not creating what you'd like to experience. You're just putting out fires and reacting constantly.
Yeah,
and then it's kind of like this organized chaos because the kids are triggering you, and then they're so smart. They know exactly what buttons to push to trigger you, and they do it like masters every day, you know? Yeah. And then if you don't have tools to parent them from a conscious way, I think it just exacerbates and it just accelerates and grows, because that was certainly what was happening at my house, because I was a very unconscious parent when I was raising my kids. They're grown now. They're 30 and 28 this year. So they all survived. That's the good news. You do survive.
Yeah, you do
I could have
survive.
done a much better job. I'm going to say that for sure.
I mean, but even me, who I was pregnant and I was already on my conscious journey, I still really, really went through it. Because like I said, with like gentle parenting and things like that, like I do think that there's a lot more conscious information out there. Like I do think people are aware of generational trauma and not being like their parents and trying not to pass down some of the traumas that they had as a child. Like I do think that there is more of an awareness of that. But when once they understand that they have that trauma, they don't actually realize the work it takes to clear it. Like they're just, they're just suppressing it or just like doing a little bit of it. Like, oh, hey, I have abandonment issues because my parents were neglectful. So I'm not going to do that with my kids. But that's really not enough because they're still triggering that trauma in you. And it's still
right. I was going to say there's still a trauma that needs to be healed. And all of our parenting and all our choices are made from that place of the wounded child trauma, So then there's that projection that we're projecting, even though we're aware of it. If, like you said, we haven't done our inner work to heal it, there's going to be these projections on our kids.
And they're not directly attached one to the other, right? Because I feel like they ripple down to the core when you do work through it. And so something as small as being overtouched, that's like a huge one for parents, is like when they have toddlers and things that they feel like they get like they're overtouched, like they've already been touched out for the day, like they don't want kids on top of them. I know one for me that really scared me, to be honest, and it really did concern me, and it was something that I was like, I need to work through this on, is anger. Like I would have nights where like Ellis, didn't sleep, typical newborn stuff, but the amount of anger in my chest that I would feel from being sleep deprived was absolutely
alarming. It's brutal, right?
It's so alarming, and it's not normal. And I know so many moms go through this and they're told that it is normal, you know what I mean? But it's not. And I didn't do anything specifically to work through that anger. Like I wasn't sitting there and I was like, all right, what's the root of this anger, right?
You're trying to survive. I think like what you said in the beginning about parenting, especially with toddlers and newborns, is you're surviving. Yeah. You're surviving it. You're surviving it on very little sleep. It's very the conditions are adverse and hostile. It's hostile conditions. You're sleep deprived. You've had no time to yourself. And you may have other children that are making demands on your time. You may have a spouse that is demanding. So like talking about being touched all day, you're being pulled on and touched all day long, demands. And then your husband comes home from work and he wants attention and love and nurturing. And you're like tapped out,
Yep. It's like, you're not Octomom, you know what I mean? You can only do so much. But again, the husbands have been trained to treat their spouses a certain way and expect certain things from the spouses. And then we've been trained to be the person that does everything.
Right.
And then we have no support. And then
at our own expense. We do everything at our own expense. We don't have boundaries. So it's just like, we're just that giving tree, that book, The Giving Tree. And the tree just gets chopped and chopped and chopped and chopped, and the kid just grows up and takes and takes and takes and takes, and then literally there's like nothing left of the tree at the end. It just gave too much from a place of love. That's kind of such a metaphor for the parenting journey.
Yeah, but is it love? Because at the end of the day, you just resent it all. Like
it's more sacrifice in the name of love.
Yeah, you're not sitting there and you're like, oh my God, I'm so happy that I'm practically dying inside because all of this is happening around me. Instead, you have those thoughts coming from the ego, like, why do I do this? Why do I deal with this? Why do I have to deal with this? Why am I not sleeping?
But I think that's the conscious part, right? Because not everybody has the conscious awareness to even question and go, like, we've been walking this path for a long time of conscious living. For you, conscious parenting, where we are very curious about where do these emotions come from, because the emotions come from somewhere, but not everybody has reached that point where they have that consciousness to even ask. So I would probably say the first step is to get curious.
Yeah.
And ask yourself, why am I feeling so triggered right now? Is it because I'm tired? Do I feel alone? Do I feel abandoned? What's being triggered in me in this experience with my child? Do I feel inadequate? That's a huge trigger for moms, especially new moms. You've never been a mom before. You think it's going to be this beautiful, bonding, loving, Photoshop experience, right?
Mom, with all your kids hanging off.
Your hair's like blown out and they're in their matching PJs all in the bed while you're reading your paper. No, it's a shit show. It's a mess.
Yeah.
You're exhausted, you're tired, they're crying, they're hungry, they don't want to cooperate, the kids are fighting. I mean, whatever it is. Parenting is not the glamour, glossy photo that you kind of envision before you have children, because you've never had children, so you don't know any better. I think it's challenging in so many ways, but there's so many beautiful moments too.
Yeah, but you can definitely get to a point when you do work on those triggers, like I mentioned before with the anger. Like I didn't really dive specifically deep into the anger, but I did start to work on myself, and I started to work on all the triggers that I was having, all those emotions, like you said, getting curious about all those emotions that were coming up in me. And just as a byproduct of me working through those patterns and rewiring myself, I automatically was having less and less anger, less reaction. Like my patience was growing enormously. I was nowhere near reacting or having the same experience, even though I was doing the same thing, right? Nights up or whatever. But my experience with it was completely different because I wasn't being triggered. I mean, we can't run away from things being frustrating or hard or exhausting, right? Like those things are never going to go away as a parent, but you don't have to be triggered. So like having frustration and being annoyed or something like that is something different entirely than being triggered by trauma living in your body.
I want to go a little deeper into your healing process, because I think this could really help somebody. Obviously, we've talked about curiosity and awareness of what's happening when it's happening.
Yeah.
Like if you're yelling every day, you probably should look at that.
Yeah, I think a really big one that I did to start rewiring was being incredibly aware of how I was reacting versus responding. So if I was triggered immediately, so any emotion of annoyance, frustration, anger, anything where I was put off, I would pause and I would say, why am I feeling this way? And then I would have to take myself out of my own perspective. Like this person likely is going through this, it's not personal. I don't have to take it this way. You know what I mean? And I would have to pretty much talk myself off the ledge, even if it took me time. So let's say I was talking to someone in person and maybe they said, let's talk about this later. Or if I'm on the phone, like I just wouldn't answer until I was ready to answer, until I felt like I was in a more
Don't text back.
Don't text back. Don't pick up the phone call. Just take a step back for myself. And even though I was literally dying inside to do that, I slowly noticed the improvement. And also like, when you react and then you have guilt about that reaction after that.
Totally. Yeah.
When I was deciding to respond instead, I didn't have that. And that was the kind of like a little bit of like push that I needed to keep doing it. So I just kept doing it. And like, for example, like my ex-husband, like he was like a big trigger for me, especially with the newborn. So like everything he did was annoying to me.
Right.
So I consciously, and with Jonathan, they were my two biggest mirrors at the time. So I was always like, okay,
breathe.
Let's breathe. Let's take it back. We're going to think about how we feel. We're going to think about the situation and how we would choose to respond. And over time, I was less reactive. I was naturally taking pause. I was naturally taking myself out of the frame of victimization. Like someone's not coming at me. We're just having a conversation, right? And
that's huge right there.
That really helps.
Feeling that victimization, because I will say, and I speak from personal experience, there is a lot of insecurity that comes with being a parent. You want to do it well. You want to be the best mom you can be to your kids. For me, there was also this programming that I needed to be perfect. And that doesn't exist, by the way. So you're just working so hard to be the perfect mom. And it's it's very vulnerable, because you feel like when you do get angry, when you're not responding and doing those things that you're talking about, being conscious, taking the pause, not reacting, and like even just giving yourself that little window of space to respond in a healthy way, when you're not doing that, it kind of builds this shame story. You feel guilty, you feel bad, and then it becomes this pattern where you get triggered by your kids. You're in like on a hamster wheel.
Yeah.
And you can't get off, and you want to, but you don't know how. And a lot of people aren't really good about seeking help for themselves. Now, if it was someone like, you want to help your spouse, you want to help your kids, you're going to go like you did for Jonathan, you got him grief counseling. But we don't have the awareness sometimes to get and seek help for ourselves, because for me, it felt like failure. And failure was like the thing I wanted to avoid at all costs. That's what perfectionists, they don't fail. By the way, you don't do failure. You don't do vulnerability. So I wish that I had the knowledge that I have now about being conscious and really going in and really asking questions, and not without judgment, just curiosity, pure curiosity, like why?
Yeah. And that's the root of the feeling of failure. That's the root of mom guilt. Oh, mom guilt was the number one thing that someone was stabbing me in the chest. Like if I did something that I would feel mom guilt after, like for example, if I got angry at my newborn for
right.
Like I would have these moments where I'd have to put him down and I would just have to scream because I had so much out, and I felt so guilty after, so guilty. Like I would just be depressed about it.
Oh, he was so cute too. And you're like, how can I look at this face? And
that's what I would say to myself. I'm like, how can I get mad at this precious, beautiful child for just being a child? And it's literally just because he's literally.
But you've also had like no sleep. You've had literally no sleep, no help. You divorced from your husband very early on. Mm-hmm. You're like a single mom with a 6-year-old and a newborn. That's a lot.
Yeah. Well, he was a little older. He was 8 at the time.
Oh, he was 8. Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, so it's like that's where the failure and the mom guilt comes in, but it is judgment towards ourselves. Yes. We don't give ourselves a break at all. And I think it was hard for me at first to formulate that. It's like, okay, in context, yeah, I don't want to judge myself, but how do I actually stop judging myself, right? And
don't you think it's so subliminal? Like we don't even realize we're doing it.
Yeah.
It's like right there. It's just always right there.
Yeah, it's like literally like the second voice in your head. It's an automatic thing that you grow up getting used to being there.
Right.
And I think when I did grief counseling, she was able to point out to me that I was not able to actually hold space for myself so I could actually process feelings.
That is a huge right there. I don't think any of us are taught how to hold space for ourselves in a loving, compassionate, kind way. We're so used to treating ourselves as afterthoughts. We're critical of ourselves. We judge ourselves. We're so harsh. And I think what you said right there, that was like, if anyone takes anything away, that's it. We have to learn to hold space for ourselves to be where we are without judgment and with compassion.
With compassion and with true actual compassion. And that was the way that I was able to start reframing the way that I dealt with myself, was because I realized that when I wasn't holding space, what you're doing is you're literally like, degrading yourself, and you're pushing yourself, and you're telling yourself that you're not allowed to have feelings. And that's not really realistic. At the end of the day, you're gonna have feelings,
especially right after having a baby. Right. You have so many hormones going on and changes in your sleep patterns and cycles. And if you have multiple children, you've just compounded the level of difficulty.
Yeah.
right? Like if you have multiple children trying to deal with all that. So yeah, wow, that's just so much to process, I think, if you don't have the tools.
Yeah, I think that alone, like if you are recognizing that you are having negative feelings about yourself, that you actually give yourself space to feel them, not talk yourself out of them, because I think we do that a lot as well. Like, you know what, I'm not a bad mom. I'm not this, I'm not that. I don't have to be sad today, right? Like, no, allow yourself to be sad today. It's really not that serious. So it's just like
And
just
that we
need
also need to
feel
know
it.
that it's not a failure.
It's not
It's
failure,
okay. It's human. It's being human. It's called being human, to have
but
human
that
moments, right?
Yeah, but that comes after we give ourselves a space to process the feelings, because we can't even get to that point until we allow the feelings to flow through and do whatever they need to do. And then after the fact, you're like, you know what? Those feelings aren't me. They're just things that are passing through. I'm allowing them to do that, and I see them for what they are. And now I can come back to myself, and I can replenish myself and remind myself that I am doing the best I can. I am a good mom, and I deserve this time to get this all out.
100%. I think another thing that I really should have done that I never did was take time for myself. I felt that was selfish. Like if I'm taking time for myself, then I'm taking time away from them instead of viewing it like I need to rejuvenate and rest and pour love into me so that I can pour from the overflow. I always was pouring out, but I never poured in, you know?
Yep.
So I was depleted a lot. And I also lived on the Big Island. So we had no family. We had no money to get babysitters. It was like just me 24/7. I didn't have grandparents nearby that I could drop the kids off, or I had no help.
And I think too, this is like a new fad too, I feel, is that parents feel sometimes too proud to ask for help, like to either get a babysitter or to get a nanny or to reach out to that sister or whatever to help them with raising these kids. It's like they're like, no, I should be able to be with my kids all the time. I should be able to handle my kids. It's not about that. It's the fact that you need time for yourself, and your kids also need time away from you a little bit. You know what I mean? Like, all of it's healthy, but I do think that some women have that thought process. It's like, okay, if I am taking time away from myself and away from my kids, like you just said, that is telling me in self-judgment that I'm not a good mom, or I don't care about my kids, or
Don't you think that story that we tell ourselves is the most devastating thing ever? We're so good at breaking ourselves down, especially as moms. We're so good. And because of that insecurity, I don't know, there's other moms that are kind of mean moms out there that are really good at making you feel terrible about yourself because their kids then let you know how good their kids are. Those moms and dads that are so competitive.
Yeah.
I had a neighbor that was so awful. And when my older son was 4, he didn't like putting his head under the water. And this neighbor, we were talking, and his son had to be better in every way, shape, or form because our kids were the same age. And I remember him telling me how he just forced his kids, like he just held him under and made him go underwater, and he learned to swim. And he's like, now an incredible swimmer. The kid's 4. We're not talking the Olympics.
Yeah.
I was so pissed off because you already are vulnerable. You don't need these other parents to take you down, but they're out there.
And it's
so
still
competitive.
Happening. It's still very much happening, even if it's not as direct as that experience. It's indirectly happening all the time. Like I feel like there's literally a battle between people who co-sleep and people who do the cry it out method, people who breastfeed, people who do formula.
Yeah.
It's always this clashing, and
it's like this lack of acceptance that children are different. Everybody needs different things. Every parent knows what's best for them and their family. Why is there so little tolerance amongst parents around letting people do what they feel is right for them and their kids? Like, who cares? Everybody grows up. They're all fine in the end. Does it really matter? Does it really matter? Like, what is that about coming up for that person who's so adamant? What's that about? Right.
And again, it's like,
That's my question. Like, why are you
yeah,
so why are you fighting so hard for
why are
this?
you fighting so hard for something, right? And
Mhm.
I think I definitely went through that too, because when I was pregnant, I was definitely more crunchy, I would say. And,
Mhm.
I was vegan, gluten-free, low fat. I didn't want to give birth with epidural, any medications, not even an IV. And I was so
Girl.
adamant
Wow.
about it. I was like,
Wow.
there's no other way. I don't know how these women could do it. And so I was very much like, this, that,
Wow.
like you should do this, you should do this, you shouldn't be doing it. And if
You
you're
have
not,
really firm beliefs.
yeah, you're not woke if you don't do it right. And I I
Okay.
got fed a piece of humble pie when my son came out, is all I have to say, because everything went wrong as
No
soon
way.
as he
I
came
didn't
out.
know that.
Everything went wrong. So, right, I was like, I'm gonna be breastfeeding. It's gonna be the most amazing journey. And turns out Ellis had a lip tie and a tongue tie.
Oh,
And
so he couldn't.
as soon as they put him on my nipple, it was like knives stabbing into my
Oh my
into my
gosh. No
my
way.
my breast. It was the worst
Oh
experience ever. Like I had the worst postpartum blues. Like I was crying all the time because I was
no. Oh
worried
my
that he
gosh.
wasn't getting fed enough.
This was
Because
really humbling for you then, because
it
you
was
had
so
all these
humbling.
like definite like ideas about how this was going to go, but it didn't work out. That
Yep. And then I had this really calm pregnancy. I slept my entire pregnancy, like down to the day that I got
Oh
my
my
water broke.
gosh.
My water broke and I took a nap. Like I never had a problem.
What? You're kidding.
No, I never had a problem in my pregnancy. I had the most beautiful pregnancy. So I was like, my kid's gonna be a sleeper. Like I'm not worried about that.
I love
Didn't
that.
sleep. Didn't sleep. Couldn't breastfeed. I had to get like the small surgery to repair it so he could breastfeed. And
Oh my
then
goodness, really? So were you
yeah,
just
and
expressing milk for bottle feeding him? Like,
I was producing milk. It's just he couldn't get it out because of the way that his mouth was tied.
right. So how did you feed him then, with the bottle? Like
I
how
was pumping. Yeah, I would pump.
yeah, I was
Just
just
I was
wondering if you
allowing
were.
him to breastfeed anyway. So I was sitting through the pain, like literally just like
Oh
nipples
gosh.
ripped and bare. And I was just like,
Oh,
I'm gonna breastfeed. I'm gonna do
oh
it.
my gosh, Krystal.
And so I went through it,
Oh
and
my
then I would
gosh.
interchange bottles just to make sure that he was, right on track. And he was, he never was underweight. We never
Yeah.
had problems with going to the bathroom.
He
He
was
was super
getting
healthy.
nutrition. He was
Yeah.
fine.
It was me that was dying, right?
Right.
And then I was also still vegan and I was dying to eat meat since I got pregnant, but I would not budge on that. And so
Right.
my supply ended up dipping because, I was going through a divorce. So I was already had like stress.
Yes.
And then I wasn't feeding myself what I needed to supply the breast milk.
You must have been so depleted.
I was
Like,
literally, and I was so skinny. Oh
I
my
bet
gosh,
your
I was so
adrenal
skinny.
system was kind of shot from stress and lack of sleep and lack of nutrition. That must have been a really hard time for you.
Yeah. So I finally came to the point where I was like, all right, I'm actually doing this to myself. I'm making this so much worse than it has to be.
Isn't that a huge awareness when you come to that moment and you're like, oh, wait a minute. It's me doing this to me. I don't
Yeah.
have to do this. I don't have to make these choices. Right.
Yeah. And it's not, like because I've been doing the work, it was quick, quick, quick. Like this was
Right.
slow. Like this was over the first entire year after he was born that I was
Oh
going
my
through this. Like I
gosh.
was kicking and screaming, trying to hold it as much as possible. Though I knew I needed to stop, it's like I still was trying to hold on to it. Like I ended up
Our tolerance for suffering is so amazingly high.
it's so high. Like and I was
so amazing. And our ego, like we don't want to give it up, right?
and I say that all the time. It's like, for some things, I was lucky enough to see someone burn their hand on the oven and I know I wasn't supposed to touch
Right.
it, but other times
Right.
I needed to put my hand on it.
Whew,
And so
that's hard.
I feel like, a lot of people are like that. And when I see people that are doing that, I understand it because I was there and I allow it. I allow them to go through it and touch the fire because it's
There's nothing you can say that's going to change their perspective. They have to learn a certain way, and that's by being in it all the way.
Yeah.
All the way in the suffering, all the way in. And I'm always amazed at the capacity for suffering that so many people hold. It's like, wow, you're going to keep going there. Okay. But eventually you're going to see that's not working. You're going to have to do something else,
And the best part about it was when I finally just gave in to all the things that I literally would
like you ate a hamburger or something.
Like ate a hamburger, or I gave yeah, or like, letting my son eat egg or meat or whatever because he was vegan his first year. Like I literally was like, the realization that nothing happened after the fact was so large to me. It's like I was holding this because to me it was like he was immediately gonna, get a flu if he had an egg or something like that.
Right.
And so I would have that over and over again as soon as I started to let go. And it was really just out of exhaustion of just trying to hold on to these.
You kind of were forced to surrender, it sounds like. It was just you just had gone all the way as far as you could, and you just had to do something else now because it wasn't working, whatever it was. Right.
Yeah. And so when I finally did that, I'm like, you know what? It's not that bad. Nothing crazy happened. You know,
he's still healthy. He's still thriving, growing, like the world at the end, right?
And that's how I think we need to be a little bit more with parenting in general. It's like, okay, you're not going to win every battle, and maybe something isn't ideal for you, but just fight through that hesitance and just allow it to happen, because is it going to be that big of a deal at the end of the day?
Also too, like you have to let go a little bit from the need to be right.
Yes.
There's a little bit of our ego or a huge part of our ego, a huge part that we want to be right. And then to admit that this principle or this belief or whatever it is we've been fighting so hard for is really not that big a deal. To acknowledge that can be a little humbling, and a lot of people aren't willing to go there. It's kind of, I think, why people fight so much breastfeeding or bottle feeding. I mean, there's so much polarity there, right? Like you're saying, co-sleeping or independent sleeping. It's like either way, your kids are going to grow and thrive. They're going to get nutrition. They're going to get rest. Maybe we should step back a little bit and reevaluate why we are so judgmental if our beliefs aren't validated. And why is it so important that our beliefs are validated? If we're aligned in our choice, that's all that matters, right?
Yep.
I don't think the world has to validate you.
Right. And then I also think too, like we also have, it's really common that if we pick something, we feel that we need to stay on it, because if we let it go, then we're a hypocrite.
Right.
And so that was a big question I came to when this was happening to me. It was like, is it okay for me to pivot? You know what I mean? Now, honestly, and it is, because I am now getting new information that has changed my perception.
Right.
And so, but I do think that we will hold on so long because we're like, well, I fought for this for, the last 4 years of my life.
I have to hold it.
Let it go. Like I can't just change my mind tomorrow, but you actually can. You can change your mind at any point.
Well, the whole point of this experience is to evolve and grow. We're not here to remain the same. And so like you're saying, new information comes in, or you change as a person, or your beliefs are evolving and growing, and it's okay to adapt, shift, and pivot. That's part of the process, right? Like we're not doing the same things that we were doing in the 1800s.
Yeah.
In the 1800s, they thought bloodletting was a great idea. We don't do that anymore. It's okay to let go and evolve and shift and incorporate new ideas and be kind to yourselves through the process, right?
And I think we have to, and it's a shame that we don't know it as well as we should, but I think like the number one thing to learn is how to pivot as a parent, because they're changing so frequently. So like the way that you're parenting is always shifting and changing. Yet we're holding on to these things as they're getting older, even though they've already outgrown that. And you don't want to let go.
Exactly. I was so guilty of that. I was such an unconscious parent. I've since apologized to my children. Like, guys, I'm so sorry. I was so controlling. I was like, oh my God. But I have to believe that wherever people are on their journey, they are exactly where they're meant to be. And whatever's happening with those children and those triggers between you guys, parent-child triggers, husband-wife triggers, sibling triggers, whatever it is, I know that it's exactly unfolding the way it's meant to for us to come to our awareness and realizations. I just want to apologize for my tortoise who's making a lot of noise back there.
He has a lot to say on this matter.
Yes. She's digging around in there. So sorry about the background noise.
No worries.
But what's your website so people can find you?
So my website is www.the which stands for the Unconventional Mom.com,
which is awesome. So how have things changed for you, Krystal, since you have started to be more conscious in your parenting? How has your relationship with Ellis changed? How's your relationship with Jonathan, your brother who you took in? How has that shifted?
I think I've done so much work on myself, and it is directly reflected in my experience with my children. And the biggest thing I could say is I'm incredibly present for the moment. And I'm able to actually see the relationships for what they are, not for all the triggers that were being pulled when I was in interaction with them, because they are like goggles on you, right? Like you're not able to see the situation for what it is, or for who they are. You know what I mean? You're not even appreciating your children for who they are, or even your spouse or anyone for that matter, whoever's triggering you in that moment. It's like the relationship completely shifts and transmutes when you're able to take away all of those wounds that were, pretty much wrapped around them at that time. You couldn't even see anything, all the goodness, all that you've been missing, you know what I mean? And so I feel like I'm able to really like revel in that now with them.
Yeah. And I think also what's beautiful is you're able to allow everyone to be who they need to be. Like when I was raising my kids, there were these boxes that you needed to fit in. There was no room outside of these boxes. Mm-hmm. Your kids had to behave. They had to do well in school. They had to, there was just all of these expectations. And I think a lot of them I put on myself and put on them, but also society was drinking this Kool-Aid.
Yep.
And we didn't really have the awareness back then that every child is an individual.
Yep.
And they have different needs and they learn differently. And some kids are super kinetic and need to move. And some kids are audible in their learning. Some kids are visual in their learning. And all these years, we've been just shoving them into these boxes.
Yep.
Where they had to memorize, conform, and regurgitate. And we didn't really spark creativity. We really didn't play to their strengths. We really forced all these kids in boxes they didn't belong in. And then we criticized them for not performing in those boxes.
Yep.
So I'm glad to see that parents are really taking education into their own hands now. Mm-hmm. And there's so many options for kids to learn in different environments, in charter schools, homeschooling.
Yeah.
There's so many choices now. And I'm just so glad that that's become available, especially through the evolution of the last 2 years with COVID. Mm-hmm. I think people have really realized that, this traditional way of learning is obsolete and needs to shift and change.
Yeah, I agree. Just like the workplace has with remote work, I think it's the same thing with children. And I think these children are just so much more in tune with themselves. And it's really a large reason why so many parents are being triggered by their children, because these children are bringing sides to them that they've never seen before. And I know I saw that with Jonathan, someone who was, diagnosed with certain disabilities, the way that he functions, I had to learn that. I couldn't, I couldn't go to a doctor and he could tell me, step by step what to do. I couldn't really read it in a book. I actually had to step back and observe him and listen to him and understand how he functions and what he needs, because it was so specific. And if at first, I would be told like, oh, he is a kid and, you don't have to do those things. But you know what? I did in order to actually understand him, because he's the only one who understands. And I had to learn to allow him to empower himself. Right?
Big one.
Because as a parent, you disempower yourself. And when I worked on myself and I was able to see the situation for what it is, I took my power back. And so I was able to shield myself from external forces and things like that, because I own this bubble, right? Anything that comes in it, I am going to regulate it, because I know how to hold space for myself. I know how to move through emotion, and I know how to not lash out when I have emotion. And so when that happened, I was able to give him space to empower himself. And when he felt empowered, I was able to learn what he needed in that moment.
That's so huge. How did he respond to that? Because that was a big shift from when you first got him to you shifting into that, giving him that space.
Oh, he was like shocked. He was like, oh my God, like, you just say that? And I'm like, yeah, don't. I was like, all right, don't push it in anymore. Like, all right, we're getting here, it's still uncomfortable for me to do it, I'm still doing it, I was like, don't, it's all right.
Don't ruin the moment.
Don't ruin the moment. Just go with it,
Oh
so
my
yeah,
gosh.
he definitely called me out on that. He's like, something different is happening here. You know?
He's pretty self-aware.
Yeah. And I wasn't prepared for that, for a child to have such a high emotional intelligence. And I was getting that from his teachers and stuff too. And I think there's a lot of kids like that, where the parents are not intuitive or not connected to themselves. And here they have these kids who are so emotionally intuitive and know themselves to the core, and they don't understand it because they've had to suppress that their whole life.
They have no frame of reference.
Yeah. So it's like, how are you there for a child that's more there for themselves than you are for yourself?
Exactly. Like these children coming in now are such little star beings. They're like pure light. They don't know any other way, and they have to be themselves. And I think they're here to create change. They're catalysts for change. We're going to change as a society and create a new world because of these children that are coming in, anchoring higher light, teaching us, as you're saying, to hold space and to look at ourselves. They're like mirroring to us what we need to learn about ourselves, in a powerful way.
I've been talking recently to some other like moms about the idea of like the disruptor child. And I feel like, some articles will come out of that, but, Jonathan is, I would label him as a disruptor. And by that, I mean, he's here to push the boundaries. He's here to poke the bear.
They challenge authority. They challenge the norm. My older son's like that too. He was never here to fit in this box. He was always pushing boundaries, pushing limits, testing, triggering. And some kids are that, like Jonathan. They're activators. They're activators, right?
Yep. And they're not, and it's often perceived as bad behavior. And so the parents who are not conscious are treating it as bad behavior. And then comes the medicine, then comes the discipline and things like that. And they realize that it doesn't work. And because it doesn't work, because all they're telling you is, Mom, I don't fit in this box.
Exactly.
We need to create a new life that works for my and weaknesses in this world. And that is really a complex thing for people to understand, because they are relying on the opinions of teachers and doctors.
That's the thing too, is I think parents need to trust themselves. You have to trust your intuition. You know your child more than anyone. And if we have children that don't fit in the box, like I did, those traditional parameters, markers, programs don't work for this particular kid.
And moms have that gut instinct. You see
we
it.
Do. We're so connected.
And we will sometimes suppress it. And it's like, even like when my son had the tongue tie and the lip tie, like I knew something was wrong immediately. And I went to my pediatrician and she's like, oh, it's really mild. Like everything seems fine. Like, if you just wait like a month, it should go away. And then I was like, no, something is off. Like I need to find more information. I ended up finding a specialist, and she was like, his lip tie and tongue tie is really tight. And if you don't do something, he's going to have like a problems with speech articulation when he's older.
Really?
Yeah,
wow.
Because he would sometimes even choke on the milk. And I used to literally just have so much anxiety about him not being able to breathe. Because I could hear him like almost like, when someone has a sleep apnea,
like their throat closing or something.
Yeah, because like the way that his lip and tongue were like contracting when he was breathing. So
he had a surgery very early then.
Yeah, 2 months old.
That must have been stressful.
It was, but it was really short. It was like 15 minutes, like because they just laser it.
Okay.
And so it was literally like he was out of my hands for 10 minutes and then given back into my hands.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So yeah, so it's a dental surgery. So it was really fast, but I wouldn't have done that if I didn't like go by on my own instinct to actually figure out that something was wrong, because according to my pediatrician, everything was fine. That's the
thing, right? Is if you only trust the external input, you don't trust yourself, You know, I think we're our best guides around ourselves and our children. Yet we're so programmed to seek information, answers externally from people around us, from the professionals. But I think deep down, we have the best instincts for ourselves and our kids.
I agree. And I think there's actually a movie that just shows this so well, this example. And it's really about an 8-year-old who is convinced he's a Mongolian shepherd. And
What's the name of it?
Burn Your Maps.
Burn Your Maps.
Yeah. And he thinks the Mongolian shepherd, and it starts to disrupt his day-to-day life. Like he wants to dress like the shepherd every day. And so classic, the parents take him to doctors, trying to figure out like why he's doing all these things. And the mom was like, he's just being himself. You get what I'm saying? Like, I don't find anything weird. And then he gets an opportunity to go to Mongolia, and the mom drops everything to go with him. And it ends up being this like amazing adventure. And like, she ends up finding herself in a lot of ways just from exploring it. So he's like this catalyst. And I do think our children are catalysts for us in a lot of ways. But this movie just so beautifully expressed that journey. And so I loved it. It's a favorite for me.
What are you hoping to offer with your writing and your blog? What's your message to moms? What are you trying to share with parents out there?
I think for me, I want to show parents, one, I want to wake them up to this information, because I do think that they're not even cognizant of how much they're suffering through parenthood. And so I want to make them aware of it, and also ways to take steps to change it, to live a more connected life with their children and with themselves, because I did it. And I know that it can, anybody can do it. And, but I didn't find any tools that were showing me how to do it. Like everything I found was either or, that battling of co-sleeping, not co-sleeping, gentle parenting versus traditional, whatever it may be. Nothing was really going from an intuitive standpoint, and nothing was really working towards the source issue, which is our internal traumas. It's not how I'm deciding to do a soft voice with my son that day because he threw crayons on the floor. That's not going to fix the spiraling that I have the rest of the day over it. So that's what I really would am hoping to do with the unconventional mom.
Well, I'm so glad you're doing this, Krystal. You're going to give so much to people who maybe are at their wits' end. And I hope they find you. I hope they find your blogs. I hope they find you to feel like there's hope, that they're not alone, that they're not failures just because they're losing it, or just because their kids aren't hitting all the markers. I really want parents to know that you're doing your best, and that's enough. Don't compare yourself. Just stay in your lane, follow your intuition. Give yourself some space to go for a walk if you can, take a bath after they go to bed. Our sacred time and space is so valuable in refilling our bank. You can't pour from an empty cup. I always say that,
Yeah, I think it's definitely like, give yourself the space to do it, but also be accountable for the things that you can change but haven't decided to, and I think that's something that I is like a main theme in a lot of my articles is, let's talk about accountability.
Yeah, accountability, and also let's lose the judgment. Let's just be like, okay, this isn't working. That doesn't mean I'm a failure. That means maybe I need to pivot. Maybe I need to look at this differently.
Yeah.
Because there's this internal story that we're always telling ourselves that's very self-defeating. There's always this story of not being good enough in so many people, this worthiness piece. Like, if we can kind of detach from that and just understand that we're just learning and growing, we're not failing, that would be really helpful,
Yeah.
for young moms who are doing the best they can.
Yeah.
Right. So, any parting words of wisdom before we sign off here today?
Um, no, I don't think so. I feel like we
We
covered a
covered a
lot
lot.
today. Yeah, I feel like anyone listening has got to be exhausted by now.
Well, thanks so much for being here with me, Krystal. It's always a pleasure.
Always.
Always. And to my audience, I hope you guys, if you're parents yourselves, will take to heart some of the wisdom Krystal shared today about her journey. And hopefully you can shift things within yourself and within your relationships with your kids. We're all doing the best we can here. So have a beautiful day. Be kind to yourselves. And I love y'all. Bye.